was wondering why.
Oh, yeah. All right, we are ready to go for our first. This is our very first college football 2024 preview for the upcoming season. And I mean, this is just by coincidence, but why not start at the top, right? With the Georgia Bulldogs, the team that will go into the regular season as the number one team in the nation. So Jed May is joining us. He handles a lot of recruiting content for ugasports.com, ugasports.com, and of course, part of the Rivals Network. Jed, we've been talking for the last couple of years, and I'm glad we're going to do this again in 2024. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like Georgia's got that same target on its back every time we talk. So glad to keep things the same going into 2024.
Yeah, last year, of course, with the whole playoff structure, a lot different, which it had been that way forever. Georgia was just one loss, and that's it. You're done. But those days are over. No more, hey, we lose one game, we can't make the postseason. If you have a really good resume and you're a top team, like and a program like Georgia, one loss is not going to get you knocked out of the playoffs and an opportunity for a championship each year. So we're excited about that. I'm assuming that Georgia fans are pretty stoked about this upcoming season, considering how last year and kind of ended with the loss to Alabama, even though they had that big blowout win in the bowl game. But I'm assuming with the Carson Beck returning, there's a lot of excitement in the Bulldog fan base trying to win another national championship.
Yeah, and this is their first, because obviously every year before that 2021 year had been, is this the year we're going to break the drought? Is this the year? Is this the year? And then you break the drought and you get another one immediately. So now it's back to what's it going to take to get to that next level? And they've certainly got a lot of talent coming back, starting, like you said, with Carson Beck at quarterback. That's kind of the straw that stirs the drink. And he is, he's coming into the season as one of the favorites for the Heisman, and for good reason, I think.
Yeah, we're going to share our lads' depth chart page for the Georgia Bulldogs, and college, very tough with the depth chart. So, matter of fact, if you notice anything that's way out of whack, you can let us know, Jed. Let's start with that quarterback and that offense. And yeah, Carson Beck, you've seen some good quarterbacks out of Georgia. You saw one that's won 2 national championships for Georgia. No idea what kind of a playing career he's going to have in the NFL, but he's in good hands so far. But talk about what you see in Carson Beck compared to those players, not necessarily as an NFL quarterback, but what do you see in him regarding what it takes to win a national championship?
Yeah, I think something he has talked about, and this goes back to spring too, is that last year he obviously hadn't done it before. And now going into this year, he has, not that his teammates didn't believe in him last year, but they know, hey, this is a guy who's won at Auburn, a guy who has won, a road game at Georgia Tech that was tough, a guy who won at Tennessee. So he has some, battle experience, so to speak. And I think he is taking more of that leadership role this year that he's got to take, because they lost Cedric Van Pran at center, was a team leader. He is gone. You've lost Kendall Milton at running back, who was a team leader. He's gone. So Carson Beck has got to step up and be a leader. And I think he's doing that more and more throughout this year. And on the field, he can make all the throws. I think he has surprised people with how mobile he is. Not that he's necessarily a dual threat, or maybe even what Stetson Bennett was, but it seems like every game he has that one moment where he ends up scrambling for a first down on 3rd and 6. And if you can do that in today's college football, that's about a requirement, I guess, for a national championship quarterback. So he's got all the on-field stuff. It's just the not mental necessarily, just taking over as the leader, as the guy that everybody looks to. And from everything we've heard, he's been doing a good job of that, even going back to the spring.
Yeah, so he has one blemish. That's it. And it was a very close football game. Was there anything in that Alabama game because I don't know whether or not that was even, say, his worst game. Just because it was a loss doesn't mean that was his worst game. But in his bad times, or let's just point out to a game you lost, a big game that was crucial, did you notice anything in that game where you said, Carson could have done a little bit better, but maybe that's just experience? Or were you just, and maybe the fan base as well, was the fan base just generally understanding of the situation, and it is Alabama, and it was a close game, and it wasn't Carson's fault, his first year quarterback and all that? what was it? Because obviously every quarterback has pros and cons and parts of the game they need to improve upon. So was there something that he did not accomplish in that Alabama game that may be an issue again if he doesn't improve upon it when he plays the big games this year?
I think you're looking at that Alabama game, and listen, this is an excuse. Georgia wouldn't use it as an excuse, but you had Amerigus Mims, your right tackle, first-round pick, go out pretty early first quarter, early second quarter maybe. Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey were nowhere near 100%. So I wasn't playing with the full deck from that front. And then I think there were some moments where there were opportunities to maybe get Georgia into better plays situationally, third down, stuff like that. And they had these plays where, again, Carson isn't the one calling the plays. That's Mike Bobo calling the plays. But I think as a quarterback at a certain point, you have to get your team into the right situation. There were some play calls and decisions where you're like, I don't know why they're running a toss into the boundary on a 3rd and 2 against this defense, stuff like that.
Sure.
I think that's, again, something that comes with leadership is getting in that and explaining to receivers, hey, I want you to do this on this route. I want you to run this a certain way. All that kind of stuff comes with experience, comes with having those bullets fly past you. In SEC action, I think he's got all that. So I think and I think another thing going into this year, last year, he's searching for that confidence from day one. And he said the Auburn game was kind of that turning point where it was a close game. They scored with 3-4 minutes left to win. This year, he's going to have that confidence going from day one, I think. And that's going to be huge as there won't be any feeling out process. They're going to be able to really hit the ground running from day one, which they're going to need to because they play Clemson there in Atlanta week 1.
Yeah, the schedule is pretty impressive. Not only do they have to take on Clemson, but you get Alabama early on September 28th. That's very unusual. I don't remember the last time Georgia played Alabama in September. Do you? Am I missing something?
2020, I want to say.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mid-October, maybe.
Yep, their 4th game.
2015 was kind of the same time, late September, early October.
Okay.
Yeah, it's huge. And I could be wrong. I think that's Kalen DeBoer's first SEC game, I think. So no better introduction for him to the league than the flagship team or one of the flagship teams in the conference to come to your house on a Saturday night.
And both teams will have the week off to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
So that's even. But then you still have Georgia at Texas on October 19th. Mm-hmm. Florida, of course, the big rivalry game, even though how many years in a row has Georgia beaten Florida? 3?
3, and then they lost in 2020, but I believe they'd won the 3 before that. So 6 out of 7, I think, off the top of my head. So
okay. And then Mississippi right after that. So the week after, Ole Miss. So that Ole Miss game, I mean, that's a 3-game stretch with a week off in there, but still, Texas, Florida, Mississippi. That is, I mean, I can't imagine there being many schedules as tough as that 3-week stretch in all of college football. So, I mean, as a fan, you like to see it. You want to see the best games. And again, as I said, even if Georgia loses a game in there, which they might, it's a tough schedule, they're still going to go to the playoffs, so it really doesn't matter as much. I know everybody wants the home field advantage and all that kind of stuff when you're in the playoffs. They don't have – it's for some coaches and programs are going to have to worry about that. But, yeah, in all, though, it's going to be fun to see Georgia, one of, if not the best team in college football, play a lot of these good football teams this season.
Yeah, and I think this schedule this season really comes down to the Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss games because Georgia should be favored by a pretty solid margin in all the other 9 regular season games. Obviously, that means you can lose. There's a lot of variables, but if you take care of business in those other games, let's say if you go 2-1 in those 3, then that should assure you a spot in the playoff. If you go 1-2, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself, but that you could need to get some help. If you're in the SEC championship, you could have to win. But if you win 2 of those games, I think you're in pretty good shape, even if you were to lose a hypothetical SEC championship matchup with Alabama, Texas, whoever, LSU, whoever. So those are the ones. But again, you get an off week before Alabama. You get, Texas, or not Texas, Ole Miss is after Florida. So we've had a bye week before Florida. So
Yeah.
They're not all super bunched together, which helps. But those are three just huge tests. But again, you've got a guy in Carson Beck who's led the team,
Yeah.
Arian Smith, Trevor Etienne's got SEC experience. These receivers have got experience. Just to skip ahead a bit to your offensive line, the one big question mark is Jared Wilson taking over at center. Obviously, there's so much on a center's plate. How does he handle a night game in Tuscaloosa, a night game or I don't know if it's a night game, but probably a night game at Texas. First road game is at Kentucky. That can be a tough place to play. So, and he's got all the talent, I think. Don't get me wrong. People raved about him in the spring, but it's a question of how do you handle that on the road, making calls, making checks, all that other kind of stuff. But other than that, I mean, there's really not a lot of question marks on this offense. I mean, you got so many guys with experience up front. Oscar Delp has gotten a lot of experience, especially last year, with Brock Bowers hurt a decent amount. So Bryn Urasek, the transfer from Stanford. So you got a ton of experience. There's just not a whole lot of this offense should be one of those ones that challenges school records in terms of points per game, yardage, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Let's talk about the backfield. Well, we've already gone through Beck. So the running back situation, you mentioned Etienne, so he's a transfer. You also have Branson Robinson, who apparently has had a really good offseason. And again, when you take a look at the production that was lost from last year, it's like, I haven't tallied it up, but it looks like it's about 80 to 90% of their rushing production gone with their top two guys. So how do you see this backfield? And as far as setting up, do you think it'll be a committee? Do you see it maybe being a committee early, but you think maybe one of these other running backs is more talented than the other, and you expect that player is going to end up as the main guy by the end of the season? And if so, who is that?
Yeah, I mean, it'll probably be by committee. I mean, Georgia rotates a ton of guys there anyway. Trevor Etienne's kind of like the home run threat, obviously coming from Florida. Roderick Robinson is, he's 6'1", 230, 35 pounds. He's the bruiser guy. But Branson Robinson is kind of I don't want to say X factor, but he tore his patellar tendon in his knee last fall camp, and that's such a traumatic injury, I guess, for lack of a better term. But he's looked great in fall camp. He doesn't have any limitations. Staff is being careful with him, but he looks fantastic. So is he ready to go week one? I mean, it seems like he would be cleared and ready to play week one if the staff wants him to play. So that is certainly a huge boost. And then they added 3 freshmen, and the one who has generated the most buzz is a Nate Frazier out of Mater Dei in California. Has even arriving in the summer as not an early enrollee, which seems like the rarer thing in college football recruiting nowadays. He has generated a lot of positive smoke, I guess, early on at camp. So look for him to work his way into the rotation as the year goes on. Both due to his own talent, but also, you got so many injuries that usually pop up at running back just from guys getting dinged up.
Sure.
There's plenty of depth in that room to go around.
Who do you think has the biggest upside?
I mean, I think Etienne's got the biggest upside, I guess, just because he can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can take it to the house, which isn't something that Georgia's really had. I mean, Dejon Edwards wasn't really that guy. Kendall Milton, he had some bigger runs as the season went on, but he wasn't really a home run threat, I guess, off the hoof. But I think Trevor Etienne is that guy. And then with the Robinson & Robinson law firm there, you can just wear on teams. Short yardage, second half, all that stuff. I mean, no one's going to want to tackle those guys once Georgia builds up a lead into the second half. Their defensive linemen and linebackers are going to be begging for mercy with those 2 guys coming at them down the stretch.
I know Georgia fans don't want to hear this, but injuries happen. So if an injury happened at quarterback, is there a number 2 guy that is solidified in that spot right now?
Honestly, that's a great question because they obviously added Jaden Rashada, the transfer from Arizona State. If I had to guess, I would say Gunnar Stockton gets that backup spot just because he's been in Georgia's offense. This is his 3rd season, I think. So he knows everything that's going on. Played the second half of the Orange Bowl last year. So I would say he would be the backup. Next spring, there's going to be a competition, and that's its own thing. But I would guess Gunnar Stockton is your guy if something happens to Carson Beck.
And is there right now on the program? Is there a quarterback of the future? Is there a guy that is this is our guy? This is our next big quarterback. Is he on the roster right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's Rashada who transferred in from Arizona State, knowing this is a learning year, a redshirt year. We have heard a lot of good things about Ryan Puglisi, the freshman. He's originally from Worcester, outside of Boston, played high school football at a boarding school in Connecticut. When the brief practice viewing we've gotten, he looks like an NFL quarterback. I mean, the ball comes out of his hand great. He's big. He's got some mobility. He's a baseball player in high school, so he's got some athleticism. And he missed a decent chunk of spring because he had a knee thing going on and like a stress fracture, I believe. But he has looked very good in fall camp. So I think that's a guy who, even though the recruiting rankings didn't necessarily match it, the Georgia staff was very, very, very high on him coming out of high school. And they think he could be a guy who makes an impact in the program down the line.
All right. And as far as the receivers, you mentioned Delp and Urasek. So Urasek comes from Stanford. I mean, the guy looks like a very talented player, Urasek, and I think this is a really great. This is what I like about the transfer portal. I like when kids get the opportunity because I mean, what was he going to do with Stanford? I mean, who knows? It's not many opportunities to be in big games and to really showcase yourself in a big conference. But we know that there's talent there, but he's also a veteran. I know Delp is a junior, but he's still kind of young. Bowers is now gone, maybe the best tight end in Georgia history. So it's kind of hard to follow that. But how good can Delp be?
Yeah, I think the key to how good he can be is not trying to be Brock Bowers because they're two very different players. Or I wouldn't say very different players, but Brock Bowers is such a unicorn. I mean, you can't follow that. And Kirby Smart has said that. Oscar's got to be his own guy, and Oscar is a very good football player. So, again, he got a lot of run last year. He was the second tight end anyway last year. And then when Bowers missed some time with that high ankle sprain, he really stepped up to be that number one guy and played well. So I think he's got all the receiving talent in the world. He needs the blocking on the perimeter and stuff has been something that he's needed to work on. And it sounds like he's gotten a lot better there. And then, Urasek he got here in the summer, so I hadn't been here as long, but Lawson Lucky showed flashes last year. Jaden Riddell is a freshman who he showed up at bowl practice, and we were like, who is that guy? Because he looked he looked incredible just looking. And obviously you got to learn how to block and routes and all that other stuff, but he physically looks the part. So it wouldn't shock me to see him, make a couple impact plays. Or maybe like that's the guy in garbage time who gets some targets, makes a big catch, and you're like, oh, this is a guy we need to keep an eye on. But it's not room's maybe not as deep as it's been in years past, but there's certainly still plenty of talent there.
Okay, and that wide receiver. So will they miss Thomas much because bringing in a couple of transfers like Humphreys and Young, that should definitely compensate. And Lovett, he's the main guy, right? Lovett, he's the number one receiver.
Yeah, and he can play outside, he can play the slot, you can move him all over. Arian Smith he's the speed, he's the deep threat. He's never really been able to put it all together for a consistent period of time, be it injury. He struggled with drops some last year, but he's extremely talented. Dylan Bell had a breakout year last year. As far as missing Ra Thomas, I think he's that physical contested catch guy. The X receiver, Dylan Bell is that guy. And Colby Young is from Miami, and he's, I think, 6'5". He's 230 pounds. And at G-Day, the spring game, he had a couple catches for first downs where guys were all over him and caught a fade in the end zone. And that's pretty much his role. And that is kind of what Ra Thomas's role was as well. So if he continues to progress and works his way into the rotation, does everything he needs to do, I think that will help with the departure of Ra Thomas. But even so, and London Humphreys has speed to burn. Scored a long touchdown against Georgia last year. Anthony Evans flashed in the Orange Bowl. Michael Jackson, the transfer from USC. There's guys all over the place to use in that offense. But yeah, I think you look at that top three of Lovett, Bell, and Smith in some order, and then as the transfers continue to come along, they'll be more and more of a factor as the year goes on. I think what'll help them is when Thomas came over, he was coming from Mississippi State, so they obviously ran a very different offense under Mike Leach than a pro style offense. But Miami, more or less a pro style offense. Vanderbilt, more or less pro style offense. Michael Jackson from USC, not quite pro style, but also not air raid. So I think that has helped those guys pick up the offense. What we've heard, they've picked it up pretty quick.
Out of those, because you mentioned a very deep unit, give me a one guy out of that group. Because again, you got Lovett number one. Which one do you think has the best chance of, maybe blossoming into a really, good player that's by the end of the season, Lovett's maybe still number one, but maybe this guy's on his heels.
I think it's Dylan Bell. He showed flashes last year. He's big, he's physical, he can catch the ball with guys all over him, but he's really good after the catch as well. Played wildcat quarterback / running back in high school, so he knows what to do with the ball in his hands. And can block on the outside, which is how you get on the field in the first place at Georgia. So I think that's the guy to watch. I mean, he had a couple of great catches in the Orange Bowl on, I guess, spades down the sideline and contested catches. So that's a guy who I think is poised for a really, really big year, especially like you said, with the tension going towards Lovett. When Arian Smith's on the field, you got to account for him. I think Dylan Bell is primed for a big year.
Okay. Offensive line. And so there are three guys. I know we just finished doing scouting shows for the past month with our top scouts here at Our Lads. And there's the three guys that they pointed out of the five were Ernest Green at left tackle, Xavier Truss at right tackle, and Tate Ratledge at right guard. Would that be fair to say that those three, they're a little bit different, they're a little bit better than the other guys? And if so, who do you think has the biggest upside out of those three?
Yeah, I think it's Ernest Green because he's just a mountain of a guy at left tackle, but he's also athletic enough to move. Tay Ratledge has been there forever. So is Xavier Truss. And then, I mean, you've got Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris. Y'all got them kind of 1-2 at left guard. Those guys rotate in and out. One could go play right guard if they want to get Tate Ratledge a breather. I mean, they got three starting guards essentially that they can rotate in and out. Okay. And same at right tackle. I mean, Monroe Freeling, I think it was actually when Truss got hurt last year against Vanderbilt, Monroe Freeling came in as a true freshman and started, 2-3 games at right tackle and played pretty well. So you got three tackles you could play. So there's depth all over the place. Again, like I said earlier, I think center is the main question. Jared Wilson, he's got all the ability. How do you handle everything that comes with being a center? And something that's happened in fall camp, because Wilson has kind of had like a nagging injury going on. Tate Ratledge has worked some at center, so you could theoretically bump him into center, and then you have Fairchild and Morris playing guard at the same time. So there's a lot of different mixing and matching that you can do there. Kirby Smart's always talking about we want to get our best five on the field and figure out positions later. There's probably 7 or 8 guys that could make an argument to be in that best five, I would say.
Is there a freshman or maybe a second-year lineman that will begin the next wave?
As far as second-year guys, I'd go with Jamal Merriweather right there because he's a guy. Georgia signed him or got in on him late and flipped him from Central Florida. And the staff has been very impressed with him as a kind of a project guy going into his second year. And as a true freshman, Daniel Calhoun at guard is just a mountain of a dude. He came in and was like 370 pounds or something. He's not that anymore after doing plenty of running in Sanford Stadium, but he's a guy who the staff is very high on coming out of high school. It recruited him for 2 or 3 years, I think, before they signed him. So he's a guy to watch probably more down the line at guard, just with all the depth there, but a guy that the staff likes a lot.
All right. So before we move on to the defense, then, as far as the 3 freshmen to keep an eye on offense, it would be Nate Frazier at running back, Jaden Riddell at tight end, and Daniel Calhoun on the line. Would that be correct?
I would say that's fair. Yeah, as far as true freshmen.
True freshmen.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Just again, the true freshmen they brought in are really good. They're just a lot of guys. Yeah, Frazier. Riddell, and Calhoun. Yeah, those would
Okay.
be. If I had to pick three, those would be my guys.
Okay. We didn't leave a true freshman receiver off, did we? Somebody that.
No, they signed Nitro Tuggle and Sokovi White. Both those guys are really good. But again, you've got
Yeah.
returning guys ahead of them. You got transfers. White he's a guy. I believe he scored a touchdown at G Day, kind of like a slot guy. And then Tuggle is kind of your bigger outside guy. So if I had to pick one of those guys, it would probably be Sokovi White if he works his way into the slot rotation, or maybe due to injury or something. Just because I think they might be a little, thin is a relative term, but thinner at slot compared to outside guys. So, but yeah, I think again Calhoun, Riddell, and Nate Frazier for sure.
All right, now let's talk defense. Let's see. Let's move the chart down. So defense will be. Let's see. There looks like some of the top guys that actually left them last year were in the secondary with Smith and Bullard gone. Those were two big graduations or players that moved on. And sticking in the secondary, Malachi Starks is definitely the leader back there, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. A guy who has started pretty much since his first game as a freshman. It's just been a stalwart back there in the secondary, All-American. Everything. Actually, one of Georgia safeties coach, Tavares Robinson, talked to the media yesterday, and he's like, I tell my kids that Malachi Starks is a guy that you want your kids to be like, just a leader on the field, holds people accountable, and just obviously got all the talent in the world as well. So you got him at one safety, the next safety over. If we want to skip ahead to freshman on defense, KJ Bolden right there at safety is a guy who we've heard a lot about even going back to spring as potentially following that Malachi Starks trajectory of playing a lot early in your career and never really giving that spot up. So Starks and Bolden at safety would be a heck of a tandem, as well as adding Jake Pope from Alabama as well.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive to already be put in that position as a true freshman on the depth chart. Okay. Everett, is he the number one corner?
Yeah, and this is like kind of a pattern Georgia's gone through, because they've had a few years of having like the true number one guy on one side and then the newer guy on the other side. Everett was that guy last year, got thrown out a lot and gave up some completions, as you're going to do. But the Georgia coaches have said, he exudes confidence, which you got to have as a corner. So he's one corner, and then the other side is kind of a battle between really Julian Humphrey and Daniel Harris to go after. And then Ellis Robinson, again, another 5-star freshman, is a guy who has been, even coming out of high school, people kind of knew he could be a guy who could work his way into the rotation, and that has continued once he's arrived on campus. Got to get a little bigger, a little stronger. But a guy who's going to wouldn't shock me at all to see him make an impact at some point this year.
Okay. Then at linebacker. So first I want to ask you about Javon Walker. So he led the team in sacks with 5, which is not very high for, a top football team. But where is Walker best suited to play, and where is he slotted to play this season?
Those are two great questions. Considering he had 5 sacks, whatever, in the relatively limited number of pass rush snaps he had, it seems like edge rusher, but he's also more of an inside linebacker, his body. So, we spoke with Georgia defensive coordinator Clint Schumann yesterday, and he was saying we're going to continue developing him as a hybrid player, getting the most out of what he does. I think if you're Georgia, what you need. Again, need is a relative term, but you need, with inside linebacker, you've got Smile Munden, you've got Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, Troy Bowles, just for starters, as well as some talented freshmen. So I think if you made Kirby Smart pick what he would want a little more punch rushing the passer. And Jalen Walker is certainly a guy who could do that. He can line up at inside linebacker on early downs, rush the passer on third down. So, versatility is great. He's kind of like I don't know. It's a weird situation because he flashes so much, but then, he hasn't really, he's such a talented player, but he hasn't really found the true home yet. So I don't know where he's going to play. I would expect him to play kind of all over the place like he has been. I just think he needs to be on the field more often than not because he's a guy who, whenever he's out there, he makes plays. And I just think with what is also already at inside linebacker, his talents could be perhaps utilized a little more rushing the passer. But again, you got to be able to stop the run, kind of rushing out the edge too. And he's not as big as some of the defensive end types. So that's my Jalen Walker monologue, I guess. But he's a really good player, and I think he's a difference maker on the defense. It's just a matter of figuring out where to put him, honestly, on like a down-to-down, team-to-team basis, I think. So Georgia's coaches are smart enough to figure that out. So,
yeah, the team had only 30 sacks, I believe, last season, something like that, which is, again, a little bit unusual to see Georgia at that mark, which is about almost, right in the middle of the national average or national total last year. A little bit more. I think they were in the 40s. Okay, so let's stick with inside linebacker then. So you got Mondon and Allen. So C.J. Allen had himself a heck of a first year. And Mondon, is he considered the leader of the defense outside of Starks?
Yeah, I'd say so, just because he's been there so long. He's played so much. And you're in the middle of the defense, so you're making calls and all that kind of stuff. He is dealing with like a foot injury that he's working his way back from. Should be ready for the Clemson game. But yeah, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson too. Raylan, he hyperextended his knee, I think, in fall camp, which set him back a little bit. But once he came back, he was great as well. So two guys who played a lot as true freshmen last year, made some mistakes, but with an 8-9 month off season to continue learning, continue growing, getting better as leaders, all that stuff. It's a fearsome three-headed monster at the top of that inside linebacker room.
And who is – well, I'll ask this question when we're done with the defensive line. So now you go up front, and, of course, they run a 3-4 defense. So Williams, he's the main guy up front, Michael Williams. How do you compare him to some of the really top-end prospects that have come out of Georgia over the last 3 to 5 years?
It's kind of weird because he is almost like a 4-3. Like if I just looked at him, he looks like a 4-3 defensive end. But like you said, that's not really what Georgia does. So this year he's kind of transitioning to more of a standing up guy coming up. I mean, he's coming off the edge anyway, but standing up more instead of with his hand in the dirt. They kind of experimented with that in the Orange Bowl and liked what they saw. So it's going to be interesting, but I think that's also going to put him in a position to better get after the quarterback, which again, like I mentioned with Jalen Walker, that's something that Georgia needs is to get more heat on the quarterback. So get him standing up and then get these other guys like, Brinson, Xavier McLeod, who transferred from South Carolina, Kristen Miller, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, guys like that, kind of sliding into Michael's old role with his hand in the dirt and let Michael rush off the edge.
Stackhouse, is he the next in line as far as talent on the defensive line?
Yeah, he's him. I mean, as far as pure talent, honestly, I might say Warren Brinson just because he flashes all over the place. Stackhouse is more of the guy who takes up blockers and frees up space for the linebackers. Not to say he's not a good player. He just didn't necessarily have as many highlight plays as Brinson does. But yeah, Brinson is a very talented guy who it doesn't seem like he's been in Athens as long as he has. I mean, he's a senior, it says there. So, but I think with more extended run, you're going to see him make a lot of plays throughout the year.
Okay. And were there any freshmen to keep an eye on in the front seven? True freshmen.
Front seven, I know he's way over to the right on the depth chart over here, but Joseph Jonah Ajonye, coming out of Texas, is a guy who you talk about first off the bus guys, that's him. And I think he's kind of like Michael Williams in the fact that he's worked with his hand in the dirt some. He's worked kind of with the outside linebackers some. So I think as the year goes on, he could be this year's freshman that works his way into like a situational pass rushing role and then in turn steps into a bigger role going into 2025. But with his skill set, his athleticism, I mean, he enrolled early, so he's been on campus for a while. That's a guy that I would, especially as the season goes on and he just learns more and more, that's a guy I'd expect to see make some plays.
Okay. All right. So taking a look, by the way, as far as the transfer portal, and we talked already about a few guys that have come over, has it so far, it's still kind of early, but has it hurt or helped the football team more or less?
I think it has helped Georgia because I think they use it to plug holes that they need more so than just we're going to bring in a ton of guys and hope something sticks. I mean, they needed a running back and they got ATN. I think this is the year or cycle or whatever. This is the most transfers they've added. With Jake Pope is there, Xavier McLeod, the 3 receivers, Urasek, the tight end. They added Colin Gill as a safety from Oregon. So that's, probably 7, 8 guys, and all that positions in need. So I think it helps them. I mean, obviously, like every school, you're going to lose guys. That's just the way it is. But they haven't had any. A.D. Mitchell a couple of years ago was one that I think took some people by surprise and kind of stung a little bit. But he had his child in Texas, so it makes sense. But I don't think they haven't had that one guy that just cripples you, I guess. Whereas they've used it, and guys they brought in Tyke Smith, who was one of the centerpieces of the defense last year, was a transfer. Darion Kendrick, who started on the 21 national championship team, transfer. So I think they've done a good job of getting guys in. Dominic Lovett's a transfer from Missouri, so they've done a good job of getting guys in that they think fit their program and guys who they know will have a defined role, and the guys that fit that role once the season starts.
Yeah, because you can look at it both ways. Just like you said, especially when you have a top program. I know the little guys, they don't want to see the big guys who do such a great job of recruiting benefit more by plucking, really good players from maybe lesser programs. But what you would think would happen is that all the recruiting that a team like Georgia's done, all this great recruiting, and the reason why it's so great is not just because of the starters, it's because of the number 2 guys and the number 3 guys. Those are the guys that you would think would then leave the program, because I don't want to be a number 3 or a number 2 guy in Georgia when I could be a number 1 guy somewhere else. So you really haven't noticed that too much with Georgia so far?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, that absolutely happens. They had a bunch of guys they had 3 or 4 guys go to Syracuse this past offseason when Fran Brown up there to be the head coach. Several guys all ended up at Purdue randomly. I don't know what the connection is there. But yeah, like you said, and nowadays, listen, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day with free transfers and stuff. If you are a under recruited or whatever guy, you could come to Georgia for a year and learn and develop and develop your skill set. And then if it's still clear after that playing time might not be in your future, you can go off to somewhere else knowing you've spent a year getting developed by one of the best coaching staffs in the country, and there's no penalty, so to speak, for it. So. Yeah. There's definitely been some guys lower down the depth chart that have transferred. I don't want to say transferred down, transferred out. But again, that's going to happen when you stockpile this much talent. When the cream rises to the top, there's going to be some guys who kind of appear blocked off from playing. And Kirby Smart, I think they do a good job of being frank with guys about what their future prospects might look like, and then they head off for greener pastures.
Special teams going to be okay?
Yeah, Brett Thorson is back, the Australian punter. Rocket foot, great personality. And then Peyton Woodring, the freshman, who had some freshman moments last year, but steadied out. Another year is going to do him a lot of good. Returner, I think, is a question because they didn't have a ton of explosive plays in the return game last year. But in that game against Alabama late, they put in true freshman Anthony Evans, and he ripped off like a 30-yard punt return. So I would expect him to get a lot of looks at punt and maybe even kickoff return because he showed a different burst than some other guys they had returning last year. But yeah, as far as specialists, they'll be fine. Kirby Smart, they do a good job of getting high impact players on coverage units. So the coverage units have been good. I think the next step, so to speak, is getting more out of those return games than they've gotten the past couple of years.
And then before I let you go, give me a breakthrough player. Give me your top breakthrough player on either side of the ball. And I'm sure you've already mentioned them.
Yeah, I'll go Dylan Bell on offense.
Okay.
On defense, I'll go CJ Allen because I think he's a guy that not a ton of people know,
Yeah,
but I
you're
think
right.
he has got all the talent to be the next great Georgia linebacker. That Roquan Smith line, Nakobe Dean, Monty Rice, Smile London, who obviously is still there, Quay Walker. I think CJ Allen's that guy. And I think now that he's going to be a starter, a huge, huge contributor, I think he's going to become a more of a nationwide name as this season goes on.
Do you have time to follow the rest of the conference?
A little bit. I know. I think Alabama's coach retired, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Like remember that?
That's a rumor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a rumor. But I think Georgia is. Me personally, I'm still in. I'll believe it when I see it with Texas a little bit. I obviously went to playoff last year, and that's great, but I want to see it sustained, especially going to a new league. They've obviously got a ton of talent. Quinn Ewers coming back is great. And I'm really curious to see what Alabama looks like, just because no one has seen them without Saban since what 06. So they had so much roster turnover, guys leaving, guys coming in. But yeah, I mean, I still think it's a Georgia, Alabama, Texas top trio. I mean, right, and Ole Miss too. I'm curious. I think Ole Miss has fallen into that little bit of the Penn State of the SEC. They win a lot of games, but they can't really get over the Georgia Alabama hump.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't know if they play Alabama or not. They obviously play Georgia. So does Ole Miss prove to be something more than the offseason hype team? And is this the year and again, they could lose to Georgia and lose another game and still maybe make the playoff. So this could be the year they make a run. So same goes for Penn State if they lose to Ohio State and Michigan. So who steps up to be that fourth team? Because LSU, you got the questions there. Oklahoma, do they build on last year? There's a lot of, does Tennessee continue to be that upper echelon team with a new quarterback? So I think there's some questions out there. What does Texas A&M look like with Mike Elko? But yeah, I think at the top, it's still Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. It's a real hot, I know, but those three have separated themselves as the upper echelon, and Georgia plays both of them. I don't know if Alabama and Texas play again or not, but it's going to be fun to see it actually play out on the field for sure.
Yeah, there's so many nice storylines. Levy, let's see what he does as a head coach. KJ Jefferson's moved on from Arkansas. How will that affect that program? Auburn, Hugh Freeze, definitely not going to give up on him. You mentioned Kentucky before. They just, it's incredible the job Mark Stoops has done there. Just incredible. And Florida, do you think Billy Napier's in big trouble? Do you believe the hype?
I think because everybody talks about what the record's going to be. I think it's going to be just as much as like how the record looks. Like if you're losing all these games by one score, maybe not. But if you're losing them by one score because of coaching,
then that's
different. Or if you're just getting blown out of the water. That Miami game week 1 is so huge for him. And I don't think necessarily Cristobal is on the hot seat, but that's such a huge game for both teams right out of the gate. But I mean, Florida's schedule is really tough. I think you gotta at least be competitive week in, week out. If you steal a couple, maybe, which you've got plenty of opportunities to do with the teams you play. It's
that's right.
It's not a situation I would potentially want to be in. And listen, Graham Mertz did a great job last year, but is Graham Mertz the guy that's going to get you to the next level? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think this year, unlike last year, Florida's got DJ Lagway behind him, and so many people have anointed him as the freshman savior of the program. If Mertz throws a pick in the first quarter against Miami, do people start calling for Lagway? Like probably. Knowing how college football fans are. So how does he handle that? How does the team handle that? There's a lot of variables going on down in Gainesville for sure.
Yeah, speaking of young quarterbacks, this Wigman kid you were just talking about, Elko, he could really be a difference maker there. No idea how this speaking of Big Ten quarterbacks, I have no idea if Tennessee's got one.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
they do.
again, I don't like Carson Beck last year. I mean, you can have all the hype and stuff, and obviously Carson had been at Georgia much longer, but until Nico goes to, I mean, they play Alabama, I'm sure they play Georgia. They, until you actually get in the action and do it,
Yep.
It's still a question mark, and you still, again, not that his teammates don't believe in him, but you get a different level of respect once you've actually gone out and done it, I guess. And I don't know what their non-conference schedule looks like. I know they play Oklahoma pretty early in the year, I think.
NC State, that's their big.
NC State. So, NC State's they're a good program. Dave Doran's done a great job. So that's going to be interesting to see how that looks.
Because some of these quarterbacks, some of them are going to do well and some won't. And the ones that do well are going to be the ones that we're going to find out if their programs outperform. I mean, even Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, is he ready to be the man? Missouri's, Drinkwitz has done an incredible job with this program, and now they get cooked for another year.
Quinn Ewers ready to do the SEC week in and week out, and they have a pretty. Don't they play? They play somebody good in the non-conference, I think.
They play Michigan.
There you go. So, and again, I don't want to be the guy that says all the Big 12 defenses suck, and I don't want to be that guy because that's not true, especially not anymore. But the SEC is a different league, especially A, in the trenches, but B, just all over the place with the skill you face. So I think Texas has got talent, SEC comparable talent. Do they have the SEC comparable depth to do it week in and week out? We're going to see.
All right, Jed. So Georgia fans out there want to know what you're specifically up to. Where do you, besides, let's see, you've got your Rivals content, and is that where they find it? I mean, check you out, of course, on Twitter, correct? On X. What's your handle on X?
Yeah, at Jed May _ on the X.
And do you do any other videos on your own?
The UJ Sports YouTube channel has got a lot of stuff. UJSports.com YouTube channel. We do a lot of stuff over there. Written content, of course. It's all ramping up now that the season's almost here.
Thank goodness. Yes, football's almost here. It's going to be a great season. Playoff season should be fantastic. And Georgia's definitely going to be in the middle of it. So we look forward to talking to you at some point during the season. I don't know when, but hopefully we'll catch up at some point, Jed.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you. Don't forget, subscribe, like, and share. I just finished our first NFL interview with the Carolina Panthers, so that's available on the channel. You can check that out. And our next college football interview looks like it's going to be on Friday, Oklahoma State. We're going to talk Oklahoma State, Cowboys, Big 12 football. So subscribe, like, and share. Don't miss the show. We'll see you guys on the next side.